to you. Good morning to you. Rise and shine. Rise and shine. Good morning, good morning, good morning to you. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown, and I realize that it may not be morning for you when you're listening to this right now, but it is for me when I'm recording, and that's unusual. It's very rare. It may have happened before, but it's extremely rare that I wake up in the morning and the first thing I do is come to the mic to speak with you. It's very rare, but it's happening today because there's a big event happening in my household. My eldest daughter has a viola recital today. So this has got to get done early and out of the way so I can focus my attentions there. You see, I have, I think, an important role to play. Last year, when she had her viola recital, I was not around earlier in the day leading up to the performance. I had other responsibilities and I met them there. And I learned later that earlier in the day and in the car ride on the way to the recital, my daughter was, very nervous, and my wife, she is not a performer by nature. In fact, she is the sort of person who does not want to have attention on her, and she's not really been someone who's gotten up on stage in front of other people a lot. And so she gets really, really nervous for her, maybe even more nervous than my daughter does. And my daughter could feel that. And the two of them kind of got into some sort of panic a little bit on the way to the recital. Now, it ended up being fine. But as someone who has trained and spent a lot of my time getting up on stages in front of people, and anybody listening to this who's done that, yoga teachers know this. The way that you manage your state and your mind in the hours leading up to when you need to perform is essential. It's kind of everything, right? So for the last several days, I've been having these conversations with her and talking about strategies and different techniques that we could employ so that the nervous energy and the excitement of the day and the coming performance doesn't overwhelm you and you end up expending all this extraneous energy, that you could find a way to process and then ultimately funnel all of this energy into the moment when it comes time to play. So we're going to get to see how well it goes. Now, for me, it doesn't matter how well the performance goes today because I'm already proud of her beyond words. Her understanding of music and her ability to read music and play music is so far beyond anything that I've ever been able to learn. I'm so impressed. The other night, she was playing downstairs in the living room, and she was by herself. She was not worrying about whether or not she was going to get it right or make a mistake, and she was just in it, and she was just feeling it, and it was truly transcendent. I sat in my bedroom upstairs listening to her play, weeping. It was so fantastic. I'm so blown away by her. It doesn't matter. I just am enjoying that we are in this dialogue together, and I'm so curious to see if she can manage herself today. I feel like it's a yoga practice with her today, which isn't something that we have had. A real yoga practice, not the breathing and moving practices necessarily, but when you actually have it happen in your life in the context of what you're doing and being. And that just so happens to be one of the topics in today's conversation with Adam Keene, which I will tell you about in just a bit. But I'm just excited. I'm excited to see her in all her glory today. And it is Sunday morning, Tomorrow is the day that this will hit the feed, which is Monday, November 8th. And do you know what Monday, November 8th is? That's the day I'm doing 2 free info sessions about my teacher training starting in January. So if you're listening to this the day it comes out, if you're someone who listens in the morning when it comes out, they're happening today, and they're happening at 2 different times. So it should accommodate your time zone. I should also mention that if you're in Europe and you take classes with teachers in the United States, and last week your classes were an hour earlier because you all turned your clocks back a week earlier than we did, well, we turned them back last night. So this week we're all back on the same times as we were. So if your classes were an hour earlier last week, they're back to their regular time this week. And this holds true for the info sessions today. Why don't you come? It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to answer any questions anybody has about the training I'm doing. And I just really want to talk about what I think yoga education ought to look like these days. And I want to hear from anybody who shows up about what you think yoga education ought to look like. I think it's going to be super fun, and you are welcome to attend. You can go to jbrownyoga.com/training, and the link and the password for the Zoom meetings are there. There's also a button to fill out a short 3-question application. And if you don't mind doing that, it's super helpful for us to know who you are. But even if you don't fill out that application, the link and password is there. Come to the sessions. They're happening today. There's also some happening next month as well. But if you're around, show up today. I'll be there. I look forward to it. jbrownyoga.com/training. Speaking of the evolution of yoga education and how things are happening today compared to how things were happening in the past, my talk today is with Adam Keene. And I had not met Adam before, but we hit it off pretty quick and had a very nice rapport right off the bat. You'll hear Adam has a podcast himself called Keene on Yoga. So I think that gave us a nice in, and we had a lot of fun talking. Someone had sent me a post of his that was about one of his teachers, Sharat, and it was very relevant to a conversation I've been having on this show about reconciling abuse histories and how to hold teachings and teachers in light of them. And so I had reached out to him for that, and we do talk about that, but we also got into some other very deep stuff just about what our experience of practice is, and a concept of devotion that is not about giving your power over to someone else, but about connecting to life. So it was super fun to talk with Adam, and I'm glad to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to that, let me shout out some podcast premium subscribers. Thanks to Nancy Alkire and Adela Lucasiu. Shout out Nan and Adela. We really appreciate you supporting the show. If you've been listening and appreciating what you hear, and maybe you want to get access to the full archives, or you just want to show your support and appreciation, the way to do that is to become a podcast premium subscriber. It's choose your rate. You can cancel at any time. If you're someone who's really strapped for cash and you want to get to those archive episodes, just email us. We will hook you up with a free account. But if you're in a position to give even just a little something, it's really what keeps this show going. And we are incredibly grateful to the people who do that. To learn more about becoming a podcast premium subscriber, along with all of my other stuff, the teacher training or my regular live stream classes and teacher meetings, all of my stuff, everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all, I think that is good for now. I will touch base with you briefly on the other side, but let's do it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Adam Keene. Hello?
Hello.
Hey, Adam.
You all right? Oh, I've got my video off. How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Pretty good. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can. Well, thanks for the invite. I've listened to many of your podcasts, so it's really nice to be having a chat with you.
Oh, very cool. I've listened to several of yours as well, and I'm glad to speak to you also.
Have you?
Yeah, of course.
Good.
I always try to especially if someone's coming on and they have a podcast, you know.
Oh, yeah. It's a bit easier, isn't it? You get a feel if it's someone. But to be honest, I mean, the podcast thing I find it so difficult, actually. I find it way easier to be interviewed than to interview. Because by the time I've kind of, come around to having a break in the conversation, I can actually put a thought across. It's kind of gone, and you're left with this kind of point where they suddenly drop out, and then they come to the end, and then it's like, okay, I kind of had a bunch of stuff to say, but now I'm kind of left with nothing.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, I've got all kinds of techniques, and I want to let you know I'm already recording. Okay, I don't want you to be taken by surprise. You said you listened to the show. I don't want people sometimes to be like, "What? You didn't tell me." So just so you know. And I was going to say,
you couldn't record anything I wouldn't say in person. Don't worry.
Fair enough. First thing I would say to you is that for me, I actually don't think of it as any different in a way, whether it's there's a difference because it's my show and I feel a responsibility to kind of, direct a little, how it is.
Yeah,
but
right.
In terms of being interviewed or interviewing someone else, I know what you mean. When someone's asking for your opinions on something or to talk about yourself, that's very different than when you're trying to inquire into someone else. But I don't think of it that differently. I try to just go into them like conversations, whether you were having, this was for your show or for my show, I wouldn't think of it all that differently.
Really? That's probably a good way to look at it. I suppose I just kind of thought, I always thought about my podcast, let's try and present the person to the audience and I try and get out of the way. I kind of feel like when I listen to a podcast, I look at the person okay, I'm going to pick so-and-so, right? Eddie Stern, right? I want to hear about Eddie, and then oftentimes there'll be this long Russell Brandian kind of interlude from the podcast host, and I kind of skim forward because I kind of just want to hear the kind of unadulterated person, So
I totally hear that. I'm guilty of that. I'm the one who does those long intros that you're skipping over. You're like, shut the fuck up, Jay. I'd like to hear from your guest. I get it, but here's what I would also say. I that intro thing is one thing, but also in terms of in the conversation, I do know what you mean, but I've also found that if it's just me pointing a light at them, people often don't relax enough to give you, you end up getting a lot more of a script.
Right. Yeah.
So if I'm talking about myself and I'm cussing and saying stuff and they're like, oh, this guy's not whatever, who's this guy? Then people sometimes relax a little and I get a different side of them or something.
True enough. Yeah.
I like your show a lot. I appreciated several of the episodes I listened to. And one other thing to your point about losing your thread with people, because I know what you mean where you're talking to someone and you have something oh, that's good. But then by the time it comes your time to speak, you've lost it.
Yeah.
I have a piece of paper right here with a pen every time I do it now for that reason. I didn't used to, and now I do. I just have it here. I don't always use it.
I see people do that. Yeah. I just kind of feel oftentimes it's I write it down. I could do that. But then the moment's gone because we've moved on to a different subject. And kind of to put it in again. I don't know. It is.
Yeah, maybe.
I think the bottom line is it's fucking harder than it looks, and it's so easy to be the one on the other end of the podcast listening along, right? And I think my wife's been guilty of going, oh, what a stupid question, or that person's and you just actually, to be the interviewer is really not easy, and
I appreciate that so much. I know exactly what you mean. I have been doing it for about 7 years now, and it's definitely gotten easier over time. But it's still because you don't often know what you're getting into. We've never met before. I have no idea how this was going to go.
I know it always depends on who it is, right? And and almost you don't know until you get on with the energy, and then suddenly almost I always look, you see the person, right, and then you kind of know how it's going to go, whether it's going to be a torturous hour or an easier one, now and again it will kind of you ask a question, you'll just see them just look at you and just, oh shit, that might not have been the best question or something.
That's not going anywhere. I was hoping it would. Yeah. Well, speaking of where we're going, because another thing that happens for me with this show, I don't know if this ever happens for you, but sometimes I will reach out to someone because I have an idea to talk with them about something. And when I'm getting ready to speak with them, and I'm like looking at their bio, there's a little synchronicity that happens. Like a little ding happens. Or like, oh, wow. So that happened for me getting ready to talk to you. In 1998, I spent 3 months in India just traveling around. The last week of that trip was in Goa. And it was a trip because we had been really off of the tourist track, like small fishing villages and stuff. That was our whole idea. Like we didn't want to be where the tourists were. Yeah. But we finished in Goa, and that was like MTV beach scene. There was like raves happening all night. And I was very freaked out. I was having to come home after 3 months there, having this very deep experience. And I really needed to practice, like personal practice. But there was nowhere to practice where I was staying there, like near the beach. So I had rented a scooter and was like driving around, and I found this place. Where they had these practice spaces like outside. And I went, and I have no memory of who I spoke to, but it was Purple Valley. And
that was the drop-in center. The retreat center hadn't been kind of made yet.
Okay,
you went to the drop-in, and who was teaching there?
I have no idea, but what happened was I went in and I just spoke to somebody there, and I asked them. I wasn't trying to take class. I just wanted to see if I could come practice in the mornings. On my own. And they were very gracious and kind and said, yes, please go ahead. There's no class happening there at that time. Feel welcome. And I practiced there every morning. And it was like this little haven place for me to practice before I had to come home. And there's this very warm place in my heart for Purple Valley for that 5 days where I went there every morning. And I saw that's something in your life too. I saw that you and your wife met there.
I didn't know it was in the bio still. It's one of those things you go back to your bio and you just think, God, that's irrelevant now. I used to write the bio, and my wife used to look at it and say, well, why are you talking about your background in philosophy? That was like, a graduate studies like 25 years ago. It's so irrelevant,
No, it's not. It is relevant. It's your history.
That's the thing. It's like what one feels is relevant is not necessarily what you'd see from the outside, so I didn't know. But no, I mean, Purple Valley is obviously, and I have to say for my wife, if this is recorded and it goes out, it's very relevant, because we did meet there.
Yes, exactly. And, you just got yourself in trouble to say that Purple Valley is not relevant.
No. I was a cook, and that's how I paid for yoga. That's why I always wanted to keep yoga democratic, because I had no money, I never I couldn't stomach the idea of going on what we call the milk round after university, going on working for corporate companies. I went to a very good university. So all my friends, I look at them now on LinkedIn, and it's kind of depressing, like what they're up to in certain, to a certain fashion, right, in the material world. But, I couldn't stomach that. So I just thought, right, I'm just going to go out and I liked cooking. And it seemed like an honest job, and it seemed like a job that was not non-committal. And so I started training myself in the same town that I was at university as a cook. And then the yoga came. Yoga was already there. And I started using that trade just to travel around the world and learn from different teachers. So that's how I ended up at Purple Valley. Before that, I was actually in Yoga Plus, which was the practice place previously. And that was Derek Island's baby. That was Derek Island's creation in the 90s, which was then, as he passed away, taken over.
And that was in Goa also?
No, the practice place is in Crete.
In Crete, okay.
So biggest island of Greece. Right?
All right, so wait a second. So where were you born first?
I was born outside London, small town, I suppose. Commuter town to London in Essex, the county of Essex. Hence, sometimes I have a bit of an accent, and it's you probably just think it's English. But,
I got a lot of friends from around there. I know the accent well.
Yeah. Right. So Essex is not a place you would have got into yoga living in. So it's a strange kind of background upbringing, which I don't, I suppose, have that much. It seems a strange retrospective when I look back on my upbringing, in the town I'm from. But
I'm sorry. Can you hold? I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry to stop you 1 second.
No, go for
I have to check something. Something weird just happened. Can you hold on 1 second?
Go for it.
Hold on. Sorry.
No.
Sorry about that. You know, I'm in my studio space and my studio mate has one of those damn, like, I don't know, Google Home or Alexa things.
Right.
And I don't know what happened. I must have said something to you and it like turns some freaking music on. I hate those things. I refuse to have one in my home. They're weird.
You got a little studio there. That's professional.
Well, not really. Yeah. It's basically around the corner from my house. It's a 5-minute walk. I knew someone, she's a photographer, and she has this little space here that she uses as her studio, but she's only here 2 days a week. So she let me come in and like share it with her. But she has one of those damn devices, and it just went on while I was recording this podcast with you, and that's not cool. I hate those things. They're weird. They're intrusive. Do you have one of those?
I love to do them outside the podcast. I mean, when I do my podcast, I like being outside. I mean, going back to my point of, I'm from, this Essex, wherever, outside London, a small town called Saffron Walden, actually, people might have heard of it. And I've never really, resonated with the UK because you can't be outside that much. I love being outside. And I try, so to that end, I try and do a lot of the podcasts, or I was trying to do a lot of podcasts outside. And then, which was supremely unprofessional, according to my wife, who then, and then latterly, I finally gave it up, I think, when Simon Borgolivia was interviewed. He said, I hear a lot of background noise. Is that traffic? I was like, oh God, you can hear it. Because I said, I said no. At the time I said, oh no, it's, I don't think so. Because obviously I've got the headphones on, so I can't hear a thing. But he's hearing my microphone, He's hearing all this traffic. Yes. I can't hear it because I'm
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because I always go back when I talk to somebody who has a podcast. I like to listen to someone's first episode because I know what it is. And you recorded your little intro to it outside. And I've done that too. And there's a good feeling for you, but it's not always very good audio quality.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. That seems a long time ago now. Started the start of lockdown.
Yes, that's right. I noticed. So wait, but let's go back. So you were born in the UK, but then you decided you didn't want to have a corporate job like me, probably in your early 20s, I'm guessing. And then you say, hey, I like food. I'll cook and travel. I kind of got into yoga and said, if yoga will allow me to travel, and it has. So where do you go first?
Yeah. I mean, in all honesty, I suppose that was my spiel. And as you've seen maybe on some of my social media stuff, I kind of reached a brink where I just decided, forget this presentation of myself as a yoga teacher. All I want really, and all I've ever wanted in yoga is honesty, but honesty with myself and honesty with the other. And a disclaimer there, I suppose. That was a story. And really, in all honesty, I don't think I was ever able or capable of going out into that material world and functioning like a regular being. I was, for whatever reasons, I think I was too wound up and too kind of, in current parlance and current speak, traumatized, by early years to ever function in that capacity. So hence I got into yoga for the sake of, necessity, really, to be quite honest, and that, I dove head on into it from the first day. I went home and I practiced the next morning,
Was that in the UK, or had you started traveling when you got to yoga?
No, that was still at university. I was struggling to complete the degree. And I was thinking, I don't know. I said before I couldn't fathom going on this, the corporate bandwagon, but I didn't want to, but I also felt deeply incapable of doing so, or perhaps what's the? I guess it's kind of also there's a lot of what's the point in there, and there always was a lot of what's the point. I think a lot of people have these feelings growing up, but then they kind of swallow them. This questioning. I think we end up, many of these people who probably did that swallowed their feelings for many years, and I think inevitably sooner or later they often do come up with this questioning point, and then they decide they're going to quit their corporate life to be a yoga teacher, which I don't necessarily always advise either. I think it's not to say you can't find it in the material world in the regular job, but I always felt like my what's the point got in the way of even starting. Yeah.
Well, I hear you. I think your mention of past traumas sometimes it has something to do with it where, my mom dies when I'm 16. So when it comes time for me to like start my own adult life, that idea of like, what's the point is very prevalent in me. Like, what's the point of doing a job that I hate just so I can make enough money to live when I could die tomorrow?
Yeah.
I get it.
I think when you have that, however it comes, and for some people, it wasn't such for you, obviously, it's a catastrophic, situation. But for me, I don't think it wasn't. There was never anything I could put my finger on, really. But the pertinence and awareness of death, even in my young years, stopped this the more obvious idea that we have of progression and of going somewhere, right, and have the family and I'll progress and this will be my life, and I just kind of undercut. It was all like undercut by a residual kind of feeling of the mortality and vulnerability, which is always that's always been with me, I suppose, for as long as I can remember.
And it's certainly the ripe grounds for yogic inquiry, right? Because it's about wanting to delve deeper into your experience and understanding and not give into your patterns of societal norms or whatever.
I think in theory, I mean, I don't.
Yes, in theory, we're talking in theory.
In theory, I mean, I don't know what other stuff you kind of looked at on me, but one kind of vein I plumb a lot is the fact that you get into it for certain ends, and that's there as a motivation. But also, I mean, there's still this ambivalence towards the world, and a wish to participate from a stronger sense of ego as well. If that's not done, So I think that I feel I went off piste a great deal as soon as I felt like everything had gotten a little bit back onto a more even keel with me, and I'd somewhat been able to stabilize my own sense of self a little bit with yoga, with the help of yoga. I started acting up again from and using yoga as I would use anything else in the world for the purposes of making money and demonstrating my own validity to the world, and comfort rather than inquiry. So it's an easy groove to fall into, and especially I think with the Ashtanga, which
I really appreciate the point. I had similar experience when I was done with that trip in India in 1998. There was a moment where I thought maybe I should just stay here and never go back. Like I really contemplated it as like a serious possibility. But I got a very clear message, and I've talked about those kinds of messages on the show a lot, that said, you have to go back and meet a partner and have a life. That's like what you're supposed to do. So I did end up having to find like other viewpoints in yoga that were much more about integration. And you said comfort, and I don't know about that because it's about wanting to live in my life and not be in conflict with my coffee or whatever. It doesn't mean I'm not inquiring still, even though it's about like easing my difficulties and pains. It's not about like transcendent consciousness necessarily, although it is, but a different sort of transcendence. You know what I'm saying? It's not just about like, oh, I just want comfort, that's why I do yoga. Right?
Yeah, true. I mean, words are always ambiguous. Words are always ambiguous, aren't they? I mean, comfort. Yeah, you have to have a reasonable level of stability and comfort to do any inquiry in the first place. If you're just battling, battling yourself at every turn. You've got no space in your mind to do anything. But on the other hand, I mean, can even easily get trapped in comfort, right? Because I think we long for comfort, but we also long for the unknown, as well.
I hear you. But you know what? Life presenting lots of challenges these days. Enough external challenges that I don't need. My practice is very much about just comforting myself, or easing. I like easing better than comforting. But in any case,
absolutely, yeah.
Well, all right. So I hear you. That makes a lot of sense to me. And when yoga starts to become more of a thing in your life, what was the practice were you doing? Was it always Ashtanga from the beginning? Did you practice other sort of approaches or styles prior to that?
Yeah, I did a bit. I started. How did I start? I tell you what, it was always a funny story because I started because I had a problem, I suppose, with alcohol at the university, as many English undergrads, especially philosophy ones, do. And I just knew that that wasn't going anywhere good. And I was also had been given antidepressants, which is a very bad idea, also to mix with alcohol. Don't do that. I just wanted to kind of, like I knew that I wanted to take some self-responsibility, I suppose, and I didn't really know how to do that. And I felt out of control. And I knew that I had a previous background in martial arts. So I thought, you know what, like, I don't want to do that combative martial arts anymore. Not that now I would necessarily think the same way, but at the time I felt like that,
Mm-hmm.
So I'll do Tai Chi. That would be similar to what I did. And I looked at the student union and it clashed with some of the drinking events that I was still kind of interested in, right? So, so I was still, so I was still ambivalent towards that. But on the other hand, there was a free night and there was a yoga class on. So I chose yoga just because I couldn't, there was a good drinking night on that would clash with the Tai Chi. And then, but it was Hatha yoga. It was a Hatha yoga class, and it was, at that time in England, it was like late 90s as well, right? It was often the domain of, and, without kind of generalizing here, it was a domain of, usually an older lady, maybe they're kind of 40s, 50s, often with a caring background, like a psychologist or a nurse or something. And that for me, this Hatha yoga style class was very nurturing, and I found these particular teachers wonderful. And so, yeah, that's how I started with these Hatha yogas until I started going to more of their general kind of meetups, and it was me and many of these ladies, and they kind of almost kicked me out really, and said, you're probably better off going somewhere else now. I was young, I was like, like 18, 19, I was, like chomping in the bit for more asanas, and they just kind of saw that, and they kicked me out and said, go to the Iyengar. So I started with the Iyengar for maybe a couple of years, and then from that, I got so bored with the blocks and props and setting them up that I finally found I changed styles to Ashtanga.
All right. So where was the first place or the first teacher that you started doing Ashtanga with?
So I started at university, I said, in Leamington Spa, which is in the Midlands, in the middle of UK. And then from there, I went to quite a well-known Iyengar teacher, I still have a very soft spot for, actually, called Jane Orton. She's very dynamic, well-known in the Iyengar world. And finally then, I had a girlfriend at the time who was doing Ashtanga, and she said, go to this guy who's called Mark Freeth, who doesn't practice Ashtanga anymore, he does Vinyasa. And I was so reluctant to it, and I'm still, actually, to be honest, still kind of Iyengar-esque. And so I went to the class. I didn't do any of the vinyasas. I refused to jump through or jump around. I just did the steady held position.
You were fully on the Iyengar trip. Yeah. I remember when Ashtanga hit New York, there was like kind of two camps, where there was like the Iyengar people and the Ashtanga people, and the Iyengar people thought the Ashtanga people were sloppy and jumping around and refused to do stuff. He's just crying.
Yeah. I don't know why. Yeah, I don't know why I was going to the class, but on the other hand, I was like 20, and after a couple of times, I kind of feel like, it just suddenly out of nowhere just really gripped me.
You went for it.
I don't know. I was kind of trying to reflect back and think why exactly was that. I suppose it's just the dynamism, wasn't it? That there was something missing with the Iyengar. I loved the dynamism of the postures and the technique of the Iyengar. But what never really happened was this breathing thing. They always said, that comes later, or that you'll learn that later, or something. And I said, that doesn't make any sense, really. That the breathing must be the heart of it, really.
And we can get to that. We can get to that. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and also, I suppose, it wasn't really till I felt completely immersed in my whole being in the Ashtanga, that it was that challenging, that it was completely immersive, that I started to fully feel like my mind settled down a bit. Before that point, I was still battling a recalcitrant mind of, a lot, and also just the dynamism of the practice, the heating element, the physicality. It broke the depression. It really woke me up just from the physical heating and the sweating. It was like purging.
I know. I think that the heat and the movement of it definitely had an impact on me. The other thing that Ashtanga practice did for me that I didn't get from other styles I had practiced previously was it helped me develop a self-practice. Because it was sort of a set sequence that you could just learn and do on your own. In fact, it was Mysore style taught a lot of times. That was that repetition of a sequence or form, and it didn't have to be a new sequence every time, like in all the vinyasa classes. That's actually how I was able to end up practicing by myself at home.
Yeah, I think that's very, obviously as a teacher myself, I hear that a lot. I did do it with the Iyengar. I remember
You had props at home?
Yeah, kind of a little bit. I needed it. But yeah, once you have that form, and then it's like you can kind of dive into it like a comfort blanket. You know, I mean, there definitely is I qualify that comment I made at the start. There's an equal need to comfort as well as challenge oneself in putting oneself into notions of unknownness, and so diving into the sequence and not having to think and being completely contained in a kind of almost like a kind of mandala. I felt of it like a physical mandala, and within that space, I felt confident that anything that arose in terms of feelings that I was always trying to kind of suppress, I think, could be somehow held within that protective casing of the whole form. I don't know whether that's too kind of metaphysical.
No, that's I totally get that. To this day, I have a very sort of set program. I mean, you don't have to stick to it, but I still use that same principle, even though I'm not using the Ashtanga sequence. For what you just said, because the repetition of it and the familiarity of it, it actually provides like a lot of room for all these other things to happen in practice. In any case, I guess I'm wondering, this first entrance into Ashtanga practice, you mentioned this teacher, how present was like the lineage tradition in Pattabhi Jois in where you were practicing? And I know at some point you did practice with them.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I suppose, I think one never knows how one's taken on, on the kind of, on the outside social media wise, but I kind of imagine that I'm taken as a rather kind of rebellious, kind of, and I don't want to be too much, to be honest, because that wasn't all my experience. I had a very nice and pleasant and positive relationship, which, you read from my blog post with Shiratji, who I give the title for that, for that respect, giving him that respect. But Pattabhi Jois I knew briefly when he was very old, and I didn't really, therefore, have much of a relationship with him. But, I did do my time in the tradition. I suppose I've always been of a rebellious nature as well, though. And my first teacher was completely outside the tradition. He wouldn't even say the prayer. He was very interested in handstands at the time, and he taught me a very, I suppose, a kind of macho style of the Ashtanga practice, which kind of resonated with me at the time, having kind of struggled with notions of masculinity in a very masculine environment when I was growing up. It gave me a sense of confidence, but it was very rebellious, and it wasn't anti-Mysore, but it definitely wasn't pro the environment which I learned it. But subsequently, I think that somehow I sought out what, it's hard not to go and have a little look, right? You're doing this thing, and it's like I always say to people, at least have a look, like go one. I mean, now it's not so easy, but have a go one time and see what you think of it, the tradition, because it's you're doing something which came from there, so it's worth balancing out that, and then you can make your own mind up.
So. First of all, is this teacher you're talking about Mark Darby?
No,
that's a different teacher. That's a different teacher.
Darby's always been pretty traditional. No, it's a guy called Mark Freeth, who I was still, if he's listening, I'm still really fond of you, Mark, as my first teacher. But yeah, he I think after a couple of years, even he kind of went his own way with it and started making up his own sequences and stuff.
I see.
Yeah, but there wasn't that many. Do you remember that at the time? There wasn't that much around, right? Like, no. Like he was teaching Ashtanga, and it was like that or a static Iyengar practice, and that was.
There wasn't all this hybriding going on. There was Ashtanga, Iyengar, and Shivananda primarily.
Yeah, exactly. There was no vinyasa, there was no music, there was no all other styles, and there was no there was no competition amongst the authorized teachers so much, because there weren't all crammed.
There was no teacher training programs. There was none of that stuff.
And everyone was, also the other, there was an Ashtanga yoga so-and-so and like 10 teachers teaching in the same town, do you know what I mean? Like, so, like he was the only teacher teaching Ashtanga, so that we didn't have this sense of competition and, he's not authorized, or I never knew what that's so refreshing. I kind of, sentimental, nostalgic for those kind of days when we didn't have all that stuff kind of complicating the issue of just enjoying practice. And
it's true. But you did ultimately become authorized. So you did start to make trips there and experience not that where more like what I want to say about it, my curiosity about it, because I was rebellious like you, and I never did it. I had opportunities I could have, I didn't. I guess my question is that back then there were very clear authorities. Like the yoga masters were if you wanted in-depth real education and you didn't want like superficial teachings, you would try to go to these masters. And there was not that many of them. So that's changed. That doesn't seem to be the case as much as it was. I mean, I certainly think there's still due respect for teachers, but at the same time, they're not considered authorities because of their like abuse histories, which we can also get to. My question now is though, when you went there, I imagine it's about that. It's about wanting to go to the source or whatever, right?
God, I mean, so much of life is kind of always circumstantial in the end. I suppose I wouldn't, I mean, to be honest, I don't think I would have gone had it not been meeting my wife at Purple Valley, and she was very committed to the traditional method. And even I think at that time when I went to Purple Valley, I remember she kind of used to say, "You're hot dogging," I used to put handstands in and this and that, like I mean, kind of like, I've always struggled with hierarchy and authority, I suppose. But it was a challenge, and also the challenge kind of is almost inseparable within challenge of relationship generally, and putting myself in a relationship with, we've been married now and together for probably 15 years, married for quite a long time, 7 or 8 years. And, so I think it was a part of my a time in life when that felt kind of like something I hadn't really ever done. I'd always been challenging authority and kicking against, being told what to do, and it went hand in hand with trying to involve myself in a steady relationship and commit to that, and learn quote unquote properly, in the way that it was originally taught from the person who originally formulated the system, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know whether that answers your question that well, but
it does. It does. I think also I'm curious though, like you keep referring to yourself as being very rebellious, but in that tradition of practice, there wasn't like a lot of like individual expression. You kind of went along with the program a lot. Did you at the time, I don't know, question some of the methods?
In Mysore, you mean, right?
Yeah, like, I mean, what I'm saying is that people refer back to those times, and they refer back to the way that they were taught. And now, back then, some people look back at it and they don't think of it as being abusive. Some people think of it as absolutely abusive.
Okay.
I know things changed when they came over here later. You're there at an earlier time. I've heard people talk about how it was different in the 90s compared to when they all came over here and were touring around in New York City and shit.
Right.
And there was like 600 people in the room or whatever. In New York, it wasn't the same. So I'm just kind of trying to get a feel for what your experience of it was.
We know the experience of the older teachers, and we both interviewed older teachers, and they, have different narratives in terms of what they experienced, right? And my experience was very late. It was in the 2000s. By that time, I remember Annie Gerton, who was the founder of Purple Valley, in fact, saying to me when I was saying I was going to go to Mysore, "Oh, watch out, watch out, you don't get injured," right? And actually, by that time, it was already a matter of.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.